All right. Thanks, Tubi, for having us. Thanks, Brand Innovators, for bringing us all together. I, too, as a Bay Area resident, agree. It is great to be in person, so look forward to meeting a lot of you, and thank you to our esteemed guests. So I'm James Salwasser, head up brand partnerships here in the Bay Area for OUTFRONT Media. We are one of the leading out-of-home display media partners in the country, and we're spearheading a huge digital growth and transformation for a lot of our municipalities and our urban areas. So if you don't know much about that, come find me and I'll tell you more, because I love all things about media, but I really love out of home right now. It's having a moment. My guests here, Elle McCarthy, fractional executive advisor currently at PayPal, formerly from EA and running the Ford business at BBDO, and Annabelle, SVP, Marketing, Central Garden and Pet, formerly E&J Gallo, and SC Johnson. So thanks for joining us. I'd love to start, if you guys could give a little background on what you do for your companies and sort of your roles within the organizations.
Yeah, great. Okay, this one's on too. Hi everyone. I'm currently in a fractional executive position with PayPal, where I've been supporting them on all things brand and marketing. There's some really exciting but very confidential stuff happening that I can't really talk about. But we're doing lots of work to support that in the brand team by getting ahead on things like brand architecture to represent future innovation, roadmap, and branding, go-to-market for some cool stuff. I'm also advising a couple of companies at the moment because I'm only with PayPal 4 days a week, and that's actually such an interesting and new way of spending my time that I'm really enjoying.
So my role is, it's an SVP of marketing role, Central Garden and Pet. Anyone heard of us? Oh, okay. Usually I get no. We are basically a conglomerate of a number of brands that you probably have heard of if you have an animal at home or you have a garden somewhere. And we're really built in two segments. There's a pet segment, there's a garden segment. I have a counterpart in the garden, and we both do basically a CMO-like role. I have 9 business units around the country and 1 in England, all of them at completely different life stages. So the way we're organized on the pet side is by species. So most of my days start out with, either the dog business, which is out in New Jersey, and they end with the equine business, which is in Phoenix, and all the other species are in between. So it's really fun. But as you think about what the functional job is, think of it like a CMO job, right? Insights, innovation, brand architecture, who's the consumer, how do we sell this stuff? All the things you just heard about from the retail environment are certainly impacting us in terms of the switch to more e-com. Kind of interesting in a pet world, lots of things we can talk about. But very much, similar, I would imagine, to many of the work you do, just in a very unique business organization.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So the topic of this panel is brand building in 2024 and beyond. And I just thought it would be kind of interesting, like at a core level, brands should focus on current marketing technologies, the landscape, consumer behavior, culture. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. So it's obviously a lot to talk about and to think about. What is important to you when thinking about brand building in the present and kind of looking ahead to the future? Like, where do you start? And give a little insight to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, from a brand building perspective, it always has to start from an insight, from a consumer, right? Who am I talking to? Why am I talking to them? Do they care? And really trying to understand that fundamental truth that is for the human on the side of the purchasing side of the business and for the brand, right? Who are we? What do we stand for? Is there a story that resonates? And once you can really understand there, then you can start thinking about all the ways in, right? Whether it's media, whether it's retail, whether it's influencers, content, all of that sort of thing has to come from why do I exist and how do I create value for someone and how do I understand who that someone is and not try to put my own values and systems and beliefs on top of that person. I think, much of the experience I've had is in the wine industry, in pets, I am the consumer often, but as a brand marketer, I'm sure you guys have had that experience of you think you're the person, but you're really not. And so finding those insights and those truths that then you can connect with your brand and what you're trying to achieve is critical to the success of the brand long term, right? Because short term you can have little wins, but long term is how you grow equity.
Yeah, I love that. Another interesting tool that you can start with is a brand valuation. I've always done a brand valuation at the beginning of a new brand journey where you can actually then go to the executive team and say, this brand represents X percentage of the overall company valuation, and these are the levers that we need to pull to drive that up. So that's usually trust is one of the levers. At EA, it was also participation and creativity, so like really specific to the company. At PayPal, it's building on the trust that we actually have today, because PayPal is one of the most trusted brands in their category, and I know that for almost any brand marketer, you're trying to claw back trust that maybe doesn't exist because we have a trust deficit in the world that Edelman's white papers focus on and are really insightful into. But I like to start with a brand valuation because I like to start with a conversation that you can have at the more CFO, CEO level to say this is how we want to support you overall. And then, yes, exactly, for execution, what's the customer insight? And I think the other thing that can be quite hard is that often a brand team is isolated from the rest of the marketing team. So a lot of the work that I've been doing at PayPal is getting the brand team to be completely in lockstep, not only with the marketing team, but also with the product team, so that we're making sure that the insights exist both at a societal level, but also at a product level. Because so much brand work today focuses on what is the role of the brand in society, and it can get too lofty for your consumer audience. It can be really helpful for your employee audience, giving them a reason to get up and go to work in the morning and motivating them and building belief in what it is that they're building. But the sweet spot, I think, and I'm working on a brief at the moment that I'm really excited about that does this, is how you build that bridge, the role in society, the role for the product, and the insight that sits in the middle of those two things so that you can have your brand platform be executed at all of these different altitudes for all of your different audiences with resonance.
I love that. That's good level setting for, and also easy transition. So we talked a lot about this in our prep, but you hear a little bit about this shift, and a lot of brands talk about their purpose-driven marketing and how they bring that to market and where do they sit in that space. And we then talked about well, where's the fun? How do you mix that? So a question is how can brands do both, and maybe give us a couple examples of where you've seen that and how you're executing it.
You want me to start? Yeah, we did. We had a really good conversation about this. So, I am a firm believer in fun. If we can't have fun doing what we're doing, we've got real problems, right? So I think it's really critical. And a lot of what we talked about was, I do personally think there's a lot of shift towards the purpose conversation without the creativity that comes along with it, right? So I think Elle just had a really good point about what is the foundation of your brand? What do you stand for? That does not mean that I then have to translate that into some sort of spot or ad that says, at blah, 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 we believe. How many of those have we all seen, heard? And it's kind of, whatever, right? I'm not interested. It's not creative. I'm not connecting with it, right? And so I think the purpose conversation is still very real and very necessary. If you don't have a purpose, whatever that purpose might be, right? That purpose does not have to be deep, right? It could just be fun. Right? We have lots of brands in the pet space that could be deep, or they could just be like, hey, your cat is really nervous and you need to not make that cat nervous. Could be purpose, or could just be a real problem, right? So let's solve it, but let's solve it in a creative way. And that's where the fun can come in. You can talk about that in a really fun way, even if you have big purpose, little purpose, capital P, little p, however you want to think about it. We talked a little, you asked about examples. Previous to the pet world, I worked at Gallo Wine. Anyone drank barefoot ever in their life? Barefoot? Oh, come on, liars, all of you. I know you did, probably in college, right? Yes, you did. Barefoot Wine actually is a purpose-built brand, which a lot of people don't know, right? You think of fun and purple and colorful and sweet, right? And $5 a bottle. It's awesome. It's actually the most inclusive wine brand in the world. It has the most diverse sales force, most diverse brand team in the world, and was the first brand that ever raised their hand and said, this is for everyone, not for just these people, right? And we did a ton of work on purpose about inclusivity, D&I. We can talk another whole hour about how all the crisis and things that you have to go through there, but we did it with fun, right? So it came across as inclusive from a fun perspective and a creative perspective. If anyone's watching the NFL right now, you're seeing what they're doing. That is all part of the purpose of that brand. But it's not at Barefoot we believe, blah, blah, blah. So.
Yeah, I love that example because you're talking about a brand that is built on a mission-based platform. And the truth is most brands aren't, and we should probably be more okay with that. Your question about fun reminds me of a conversation / it's kind of like an argument, but like a nice argument that I was having with an old boss of mine and mentor, Nigel Bogle, who's a very old school British advertising founder, said to me the other day, I just don't get why we're talking so much about purpose. I just want to go back to the old days where we were making ads for Lynx, which is the British version of Axe, which were just about getting teenage boys to be more confident around dating. And I was like, you just said a purpose. Right? Like those ads, I mean, I'm aside, like there is a long sexist history for some of those adverts and I don't condone that. But when they started to shift their tone and get a bit more funny and a bit more knowing and a bit less gendered actually, if you know where that brand eventually went, like those brands are executed in a super, super fun way, but around solving a real customer problem. Other deodorant brands weren't targeting teenage boys at that specific, really tricky age where self-esteem is really important and actually could be an unlock to reducing toxic masculinity, but it's not a brand saying our purpose is to reduce toxic masculinity on the surface of it. Their purpose is helping young boys feel more confident around dating. The execution is fun and creative and it's a big brand idea and nobody needs to know what the purpose is because they kind of feel that around the product, but their experience of the advertising is just super fun. I think the other thing that's happening that is a bit difficult for brand marketers is this conflation between purpose and ESG areas. So Barefoot Wines is built on an inclusion platform. All brands today need to drive inclusion from a total addressable market perspective. This is about driving revenue because the first majority non-white audience has been born in the US already. So what does that mean? It means that if you're not being inclusive, you're leaving the future audience for your brand behind. I really like the example of, and the point I want to make is that you don't always have to execute that through the lens of telling people what your purpose is. Again, actions speak much louder than words. But if you do want to put out an ad about like your sustainability strategy, look at the Apple Mother Nature ad. That is so fun. Octavia Spencer is so funny in that ad, and it doesn't feel like a piece of advertising. It just feels like a piece of entertainment that people want to engage with. And in a way, it's kind of a range product ad because it released the first completely sustainable Apple Watches at the end of it. So it's actually doing a huge amount of jobs and breaking all of these conventions. So yeah, I think we should always be trying to be fun. Well, not always. There's a role. There's a place for not making fun advertising, but there is always the opportunity to bring something to life in a fun and creative way.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more that purpose could lead to fun, and blending the two together is where we should be headed into the future. Authenticity and accountability, we wouldn't be a marketing panel if we didn't talk about it because it is of the utmost importance, but it's also something that we're going to have to keep leaning into and keep, as a brand, keep telling that story. So, what does it mean for brands to show up authentically, and how does that, blend in with some of what we were talking about with the purpose and having fun and just still being yourself,
Well, I think it really comes back to product. I do think that where we're going wrong can often be in the organizational design of our marketing teams. In my fractional executive positions and when advising, often I'll ask how marketing is structured and whether brand is sitting on the outside and whether the insights that they're executing are not connected to product. Because I think authenticity has to come from delivering an extension of the product experience that people want to have. Scott Galloway said it can, and he's a slightly polarizing figure. I don't often quote Scott Galloway, but this provocation that he gave at Cannes was, if you're watching a lot of advertising in 2023, then you're probably thinking something's gone a bit wrong in your life. Because if you've made it, you can pay to not watch advertising. Now, my provocation is, if you're putting things out into the world that people are relating to as advertising, you're doing something wrong as a marketer. Because showing up authentically just means being an extension of the experience that people want from the product or from the IP, the franchise, speaking to my previous role in the world of gaming.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. At so many levels on showing up as advertising versus entertainment. It kind of goes back to the whole having fun and creativity. But I think from an authenticity perspective, one of the things that I think about a lot, both in my current role and previous roles, and certainly the brands I advise, is really to understand who you are and maybe more importantly, who you are not. Right? You are not all things to everybody. No matter how much you want to be, I'm going to just break that little one right there, you're not. Right? And you probably matter very little to your consumer, ultimately. Right? So the less you matter, the more you have to be true to yourself so that what you matter about can stick. And I think that's where authenticity combined with purpose, combined with creativity, combined with us taking our jobs more as how do we create demand with the largest addressable audience possible. I have a finance background, full disclosure. I like to have ROI, right? So, let's get our largest addressable market to believe in who we are and what we are so that when they do choose our brand over someone else's, when they're in the market for whatever it is we're selling, it is authentic and it is something that resonates with them, that is true to you. Right? I think one of the things that authenticity rightfully has been a challenging conversation is transparency, right? We are in a world where transparency is real, and the younger the consumer, the more transparent you better be because they're going to find out and they're going to tell everyone they know. I have teenage boys at home. If you want to know anything about what got canceled, ask your teenagers because they know and they'll tell you why and they'll show you the video of how it happened all in like 30 seconds, right? It happens like this. And so you can't hide. And so rather than hide, just be true to yourself, right? Even when you are, we talked about barefoot and in our prep call, we talked a little bit about some stories around when you're an inclusive brand, right? What does that mean? How can you demonstrate in action? And what happens when things go badly? What happens when the people on social media say like, well, I don't like that influencer that you chose, or you are a bad brand, bad, right? Or anti, whatever. If you're not authentic to who you are and your campaigns and the expressions of who you are publicly don't relate to who you actually are, that's impossible to defend. But if you are authentic to who you are, you're going to stand up behind them and say, yeah, fair, I just lost that audience, and that's okay. They're not my people, and that's okay, right? Because they're never going to be your people. So you kind of have to just be true to yourself about that, or else you will be constantly chasing and creating content that isn't going to resonate, isn't going to be real, and trust me, the teenagers will tell you about it.
If I can also just build on that. There's been such a difficult backlash from the moments in 2020 where brands were all trying to take a stand on issues into the moment that we're in today, obviously with the current global conflict and crisis. And if you're not doing the work to, in a not war room situation, in a not crisis situation, really map out where you have your markets, where you have a responsibility to employees, where you have previously taken action, where you have invested as a brand, the problems that you have solved, so that you can then create the right framework that tells you when you can speak externally, but mostly how you speak internally to your employees, because I think that's where the real responsibility lies, then every single crisis is a huddle in a war room and people working off adrenaline, not knowing the answer, and a very emotional argument between different groups of people on what the right thing to do externally is. Speaking to one example from my past experience with EA, we had been working in the background to stand up a lot more manual moderation to reduce racism in the platform, because people were getting around the AI language recognition by putting racist slurs in their actual gaming handles. So that had to be manually moderated, and we had stood up a much larger investment in creating this moderation workforce to do that, and at the same time had been creating new community standards that we were enforcing, but we hadn't released them yet. So in 2020 with George Floyd, we didn't post a black square and we didn't do anything externally for a while. Later on, we just published what was supposed to be the community standards. We called it the Positive Play Charter. We said that we stand against racism, sexism, homophobia, using the language of our players, not saying toxicity, not using euphemisms, using the words that they come to us saying they were experiencing, along with these actions that were not a response to George Floyd, but the George Floyd moment let us elevate that investment so that we could stand behind the work that we had already started to do. And obviously that's not your entire crisis response strategy, which I was then supporting the company with. I think those things, actions speak louder than words, and being really, really intentional in a non-adrenaline fueled environment to map that are two really important strategies to protect brands from this moment where they're still trying to show up, but the world is very polarized.
Yeah. I love those examples. So we switch gears a little bit. We talk about the media landscape. And the panel before us did a lot of discussion around brand and performance and the measurability and the mix of the two, which was great, and lots of insights. So you posed this question, and it's hard to drive continued investment in brand, especially when there's so many channels to choose from, and then you have to prove out the ROI and the ROAS. What are your tips to other marketers and brand leaders who are struggling with this today? And maybe give some insight to that from both perspectives.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned I've got a finance background. So I'm a very firm believer in being best friends with your CFO, right? Be best friends with your CFO as the CMO or the lead marketer in your organization for two reasons, right? One, you're going to understand what's important to the operations of the business and what payout do we need on the investments we're making. A marketing investment shouldn't be a different investment than a new, packaging component or some kind of machinery. It is a return that the organization is looking for. The reason to be partnered with your CFO is sometimes that return's not going to happen this quarter, this year, next year, right? So you have to kind of work with these folks to say, here's why it's important and here's when and how we're going to look at payout so that you can compare this to other investments we might make, right? As a for-profit business, it is always a choice. How am I going to invest my money and what is going to happen to that money at the end of the day, whether it's for shareholders or private equity or VC, however you're funded, it is always the same equation, right? How is it going to pay out for me and when? And can I track that as I go? And we all know not all marketing investments can be tracked, right? And so that's why it's important to partner with your CFO because, oh, by the way, not all capital investments can be tracked either, but it sort of feels like they can, right? They can't. Right? Just getting faster packaging. Did it really make my market bigger? I don't know. Not any bigger than me putting out an influencer that says that, all of a sudden I got all this engagement rate. Which one's the better investment? That's the conversation that if you can kind of bridge between those two C offices, you're going to have a much more successful commitment from the total leadership and the total board on marketing. Because, we were just talking about this on the side. Marketing has become a challenging investment to hold on to. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that. It's really challenging to hold on to a marketing budget. And that's because we as a marketing function have a duty to really come through and say there's a financial benefit to this, right? I think we've probably all read and talked about the articles. Investing during a recession in a brand creates stronger companies at the end of the day, right? Are you having that conversation with your CFO? Do they agree to that, right? If they don't, you're going to struggle to invest in that media. They have to be on board with you so they can help partner with you on that. And so taking that down to media and the tactics, right, that's where, quite frankly, the nice thing about media these days, most of it you can measure, right? Those are kind of the similar to the packaging machinery. I can measure when I get engagements. I can measure when I get more followers. I can measure these things, and we can start talking about why that's important with the C-suite.
Yeah, I love that. And building on it, quantifying your top of funnel awareness drivers, and potentially not linking them only to marketing metrics. I've authored a white paper on why to continue investing in brand during a market downturn, which if anyone messages me on LinkedIn, I will give to you and you can use with your executive stakeholders. I have many friends and colleagues and connections who've used it successfully now. But it basically gives the data behind what investing in the long term can do for your brand, especially when other people are pulling back. So in a market downturn, other people spend less, so you can actually outshout your awareness levels from lower levels of spend. There's also other problems that brand awareness can solve, like price sensitivity. So I've before spun up a project, gone to the CEO, CFO, and said, brand building is going to reduce our price sensitivity. This is our price sensitivity issue, and we'll be able to measure it like this. This is the experiment that we're going to put forward. Obviously, brand building can always support corporate affairs, so there can be corporate affairs agendas that brand can be really instrumental in driving. But those are just two examples. I think we don't do a good job of quantifying the top of funnel because we allow that conversation to be led by media agencies only. So we just talk about them in terms of awareness volume. And I also think that that's partly why marketing is in the state that we've got ourselves into, because it used to be much simpler. And then social media took over, channels proliferated, strategies diversified, and marketers started talking about a lot of big numbers that weren't shifting the measurable returns that the executive team were seeing. And so we have to reverse that, and we have to be focused on business measures, not just marketing measures.
Yeah, thank you both. So we're up on our time, so thank you very much. I thought that was very insightful and very level setting. Like that's kind of where we ended it. Things to think about: identify who you are, be true to who you are, have a purpose, but have fun. Invest in media that's measurable, and buddy with the CFO, because if you can do that, then there's longevity and also fun. You can do cooler things once there's proven tactics and strategies that align with that. So thank you both for sharing that with us.
Great conversation. I'm curious to get both your perspective. With a lot of partners I've worked with, CMOs and VPs of marketing, brand and awareness building tends to be around central events, right? Like say a product launch, a new release, versus an always-on investment. I'm curious how you've had those conversations with your CFOs, CEOs, and if you believe it should be an always-on investment, just like growth marketing tends to be.
It's a great question, and I think it goes right back to that very last conversation. It's easier to justify on a launch, right? Because then you can connect those dollars to the awareness. In principle, you should be always on awareness, right? But the question of always on awareness is how, right? What is it that you can constantly be saying that anyone wants to hear? And I think that becomes the creativity conversation that we had earlier, right? If you have something interesting to say that people will listen to, what format can you get that out? It might not always be traditional paid media. There's different ways to do it. But if you've got something, it's worth the investment. If you don't say it. Connect it to a product launch or something that you can then start to use almost as a Trojan horse to do your awareness building.
I also think that it depends on whether we're having the conversation about a media investment point of view or just like whether you should always be activating your brand. So sometimes before, when we've had like brand specific dollars really pulled back, what I like to do is like a owned touch point inventory, but be really creative around it. Like, where are we showing up at events? Do we have a on retail present? What is being executed in a BAU way, which with some more creative love and attention could be elevated to being a brand act? Because then you're not talking about it from the perspective of media dollars that when you're looking at a blended ROAS are dragging the rest down and it is causing marketing to have a problem. You can do really interesting stuff when you're activating in person, I think.
All right, thank you.
All right.